Welcome to the 30-day novel NaNoWriMo series. This is day 27. My name is Lynn Johnston, and I blog at writesmarternotharder.com. As always, we want to talk first of all about how you're going to move the story forward today. So we are in the climax. We just started the climax off yesterday. We're at the point where there's going to be a reversal in terms of who has the upper hand. The protagonist going into the climax yesterday looked like he or she had an advantage and that they were making good progress. Today, something happens during the scenes you're going to be writing where the antagonist is going to gain the upper hand and the protagonist is going to be isolated from his or her allies. This is the day where you want to see the antagonist stripping away any advantages the protagonist had, one at a time. So, looking at your protagonist today, how is he or she going to draw on their newfound strength? In other words, having overcome their flaw, having either finished healing or having at least started healing their wound, or having dealt with their defining trauma in some way. Whatever it is that the character's growth has been pushing them towards throughout the story, we're going to see that they have some strength that they did not have at the beginning of the story in today's scenes. Also, you want to ask yourself, how is this new strength going to keep the protagonist going when things start to go wrong? This is your protagonist's do or die effort to win, to achieve their goal, to beat the antagonist, to defuse the bomb, or take the castle, or whatever it is that you have set your protagonist up to do. Things are going to start going wrong with their plan. They're going to have to start improvising. The antagonist is going to have some advantages that the protagonist either discounted or wasn't aware of. So ask yourself how your protagonist is going to show the character that they've built over the course of the story as they start dealing with all these things that go wrong. Looking at your other characters, how are each of the protagonist's allies going to get separated from the protagonist? Captured, injured, killed, mired down in battle, unable to advance and get to the protagonist to help them. Whatever it is, at the climax, you want your protagonist to have to go head to head with the antagonist one-on-one. And that means whatever allies the protagonist has fighting with him or her have to be sidelined in some way. And also, this is not necessarily a bad thing in terms of increasing the emotional intensity of your climax. First of all, because like I said, sometimes your readers will identify very strongly with secondary characters because they're more like them in personality or they appeal in some way that your protagonist doesn't. So this adds to the drama of the climax as these characters get taken out of action. They don't have to be killed. They just have to be in a position where they can't help the protagonist during their final showdown in a significant way. And also this raises the stakes for the protagonist because the protagonist, as they lose resources and they lose allies, they are still facing the same difficult tasks that they had before when they started, but now they have basically just themselves to rely on. By the end of the scenes that you write today, you want your protagonist to be isolated and have it all come down to whether or not they can defeat the antagonist. So looking at conflict, again, looking at what your secondary characters are doing and how they get taken out of action, those are sources of conflict. How your protagonist feels about losing those allies, that's a source of inner conflict. Looking at what is going wrong in terms of just your external plot. What is going wrong? What obstacles did your protagonist fail to plan for? Maybe through no fault of their own, but for some reason they didn't realize that that obstacle was going to be there. How is the antagonist isolating the protagonist? Hopefully you've got an antagonist and a protagonist with something of a personal relationship. Whether it started before the story started, maybe they knew each other as kids, or they're co-workers or competitors. They're the two biggest companies in their niche and they've been fighting it out for a while. Or maybe this is a relationship that has developed during the course of the story that you're writing. But by the time the protagonist faces the antagonist at the climax, it should be personal for the antagonist. It might or might not be personal for the protagonist, and it probably is because you want them to have some sort of a relationship and you want the protagonist's personal stakes to be high. Um, but also you could have a very good climax with the protagonist who is basically taking it, like, for example, if your protagonist is a cop and your protagonist is like, nothing personal, but if you don't turn yourself in, I'm going to have to shoot you because it is my job to make sure that you go to jail. And again, in most books, the authors do give the protagonist a personal relationship with the antagonist and personal stakes and strong feelings about what the antagonist has done because, of course, it engages you more in the story. It makes the story more emotional. So at this point, the antagonist is going after the protagonist directly. The antagonist is trying to isolate the protagonist and have that one-on-one final showdown that the reader is looking for. And it should be personal. It shouldn't just be like, oh, get that guy because he's doing better than the rest. It should be like, that foul varlet has been stymieing all my plans and I want the personal satisfaction of crushing him. That's the kind of thing you want your antagonist to be feeling at this point in the story. So, also you might want to ask yourself, in what ways does the antagonist have the advantage? And of course, this is a great source of conflict. Surprises, traps, information that the antagonist has that he's going to hit the protagonist with about his family, or the secret that the protagonist has been trying to uncover, the truth about what's really been going on. This is where, in a lot of bad fiction, the antagonist starts taunting the protagonist and explaining his evil plan. And of course, we don't want to do that. But we do want the antagonist to be genuinely trying to defeat the protagonist. And you want those stakes to be personal. You want the antagonist to really want it, and you want the protagonist to really want to win. Like, the more your characters care about what's going on, the higher the stakes are going to be for the reader. So looking at your setting, again, setting is often a source of conflict. What setting elements do the protagonist and the antagonist struggle with? Even if we're on the antagonist's home ground, there still could be obstacles in that environment. If your antagonist has set up his secret lair in an ice cave, that ice cave is still got the potential to collapse if somebody fires at the right point of the ceiling. So even if your antagonist has the advantage in this setting, the setting should be a source of conflict for both the antagonist and the protagonist. And of course, it's pretty normal for a climax to happen on the antagonist's home field. It's pretty unusual for the protagonist to basically, well, it's not always that unusual. It could be that the antagonist is invading the protagonist's homeland. But often when that happens, when you have the climax happening on the protagonist's home field, often the antagonist will have done things to fuck it up and basically make it such that the protagonist suddenly has obstacles in his own backyard that were not there before. And so, pardon my French there, but basically, if you're having the protagonist fight his battle at home, you want the antagonist to have really made the home field a disadvantage in some way. And also, you can look at how your protagonist and antagonist are going to try and use setting elements to their advantage during this battle. If it's happening in a cave system, if it's happening in a big field where trees can be set on fire or houses can be set on fire, if it's happening on a stage and your antagonist can sabotage the protagonist's microphone, whatever is there in your setting, whatever location you've chosen to be the frame for this big battle that is just starting to happen, there's going to be elements in it that if you think about it, can be a great source of conflict. Story promise. Are you fulfilling the promises you've made to the reader about the climax? Are you giving the reader an ultimate battle, the kind of like final showdown that they want to see, where like the protagonist and the antagonist are just putting everything they have into this battle? Like, this is a do or die battle. If that's not the case, you want to look at how this is your last chance to up the stakes, up the suspense, up the tension, make the conflict bigger. Chances are, like we talked about, you're probably already fulfilling those promises. But if you have done the exercise I suggested yesterday and you made a list of like all your plot threads to look at what you've set up and what you've resolved and what you promised the reader with each of those story threads, you may find yourself wanting to use part of today as the protagonist's allies are taken out of action. That may be something that could be a vehicle for tying up some of those or making some of those bigger. So if you had that list, if you didn't, go back to the day 26 video and listen to that exercise and make that list, because that will help you think of ways that you can take your protagonist allies out of the action and basically set up the final showdown in a way that is not just interesting, but that keeps all of your story promises to the reader. Getting started. Do your pre-writing ritual, do your pre-writing exercise, whatever you have to take to get into your story, do that. If you have to dress up like your protagonist to really get into his mindset, if you have to drink an extra cup of coffee to be psyched for this, if you have to go out and exercise to kind of get your second wind and get your energy levels back up. I know you're tired. This has been a big push. Whatever you need to do, take care of yourself and give yourself all the tools you need to finish your story. I also want to say it's really easy to let your protagonist win too quickly and too easily. You want to make your protagonist earn every single inch of progress today. You want to make every loss they take hurt. And you want the reader to be really worried. You don't want the reader to be reading this and have the antagonist capture your protagonist and have the reader go like, ha, well, this is going to be over soon, and this is going to be a piece of cake, and the protagonist is clearly going to win. And it's hard work to set up your climax so that it doesn't seem too easy, but it's worth the work, because the payoff of victory is directly correlated with how hard your protagonist had to work to achieve that victory. So it would be really easy today to just put your antagonist and protagonist in a room and let them duke it out. Don't give them even ground. Give your protagonist a disadvantage. Let the reader see your protagonist being upset about losing allies. Give your protagonist some extra conflict to deal with. What disadvantages can you saddle him or her with? Can you make your protagonist believe that he or she is literally going to have to sacrifice themselves and die to save all of his or her allies? Can you make the protagonist realize, oh my God, I had no idea that the antagonist had gotten this powerful? What can you do to basically take this battle and make it an uphill climb for your protagonist? You want, by the time your protagonist is going into the final showdown, you want the protagonist to already be at a disadvantage. After you write, always celebrate your progress and do whatever you need to do to get ready for tomorrow. Thanks for hanging out with me today, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow on day 28.